In the rugged, untouched wilderness of the 19th century American frontier, a legend was born that stood taller than the ancient pines themselves. Paul Bunyan. He was a man whose every step shook the very foundations of the mountains, and whose axe could clear entire forests in a single thunderous swing. But Paul was more than just a giant. He was the untamable spirit of a young nation, a force of nature that carved the face of a continent with his own two hands. Alongside his loyal companion, Babe the blue ox, a beast so massive it took 18 wheelbarrows of hay just for a light snack, Paul created the geography we walk upon today. From the Great Lakes to the deep red dust of the Grand Canyon, his fingerprints are everywhere. This is not just a tale of strength. It is a story of a throne claimed over the wild and the treason of time that slowly tries to turn our history into nothing more than a myth. The birth of the Titan. Our story begins in the North Woods, where the air is thick with the scent of pine and the cold. Well, the cold bites like an iron saw. They say when Paul was born, it took 5 giant storks to deliver him to his parents. A single bird simply couldn't carry the weight of his destiny. He was so large that his very first cry knocked the windows out of every house in the county. The vibration was felt as far south as the Gulf of Mexico. His parents had to build his cradle out of a reinforced lumber wagon, and his teething ring? It was a polished granite stone from the riverbed, which he ground into fine dust before his 2nd birthday. As he grew, he didn't just walk through the woods, he reshaped them. By the time he reached manhood, Paul Bunyan had become a titan. His red plaid shirt was visible from 3 counties away, and when he laughed, pause for effect, it echoed across the plains like summer thunder. The Blue Companion and the Great Cold. One winter, history records a season so brutal that the snow fell a brilliant, chilling blue. In that winter of the blue snow, the temperature dropped so low that words literally froze in the air as they were spoken. People had to wait until the spring thaw just to hear what their neighbors had said months before. It was in this sapphire blizzard that Paul found a small calf shivering in a drift. Because of that blue snow, the calf's fur had turned a permanent deep blue. Paul took him in, named him Babe, and from that day forward, they were inseparable. Babe grew at an impossible rate. Eventually, he measured 42 axe handles between the eyes. Together, they were a force of nature. If Paul needed to move a forest, Babe would pull the entire landscape behind him. If a mountain range blocked their path, Babe would simply nudge it aside with a flick of his tail. Their bond was the heartbeat of the frontier, a partnership between man and beast that defined the power of the American wild. The shaping of the world. Paul's feats were the stuff of wonder. He carved a throne out of the raw, unyielding earth. People ask where the Great Lakes came from. Well, Paul needed a watering hole to satisfy Babe's unquenchable thirst during a dry summer. And the Mississippi? That started when a massive water tank Paul was hauling sprung a leak. It carved a deep path all the way to the Gulf in a single afternoon. Even the Grand Canyon, that deep red chasm, was an accident. Paul was just dragging his heavy axe behind him while looking for a place to sleep. He wrestled fearsome critters like the hodag and the tea-kettler, creatures that haunted the dark corners of the woods where no ordinary man dared to step. Every action Paul took defied logic, but it all served one purpose: to tame the land and make a way for the pioneers who would build a new world. The lumberjack's camp. Now, life in Paul's camp was as legendary as the man himself. The kitchen was so massive that the cooks had to wear roller skates made of giant slabs of bacon just to grease the griddles fast enough. The dinner horn was so loud that the first time it was blown, it knocked down 10 acres of pine trees and caused a stampede 3 states over. Paul's men were the 7 axe men, giants who could chop down a forest before the sun was even up. They ate pancakes by the thousands and drank coffee by the barrel, their voices joining in songs that could be heard across the Atlantic. But even among these titans, Paul stood alone, the king of the timber, a man whose strength was matched only by his sense of justice and his love for the land he called home. The treason of time. But even for a giant, the world began to change. As the 19th century drew to a close, the wild frontier began to fade. The great dark forests were replaced by iron railroads and smoke-belching factories. The treason of progress meant there was less room for a man who could fell a forest in a single swing. The giant of the North Woods slowly realized his time was passing. The world was becoming too small. Some say he moved further north to the frozen, untouched tundra of the Arctic, where the trees are still tall enough for his axe. Others believe he is still out there, resting in the deep, dark charcoal forests, his massive axe stuck in the ground like a monument to a forgotten age. Paul Bunyan remains the ultimate symbol of the American spirit, rugged, massive, and impossible to contain. He reminds us that before there were thrones of timber, there were thrones of timber and the raw, unbridled power of the human spirit. History remembers the dates and the names of kings, but the wilderness remembers the giants. Paul Bunyan was the architect of the wild. He challenged the mountains and won. His story is our foundation, a reminder that the greatest treason is to forget our rugged roots. As the sun sets over the great North Woods, if you listen closely to the wind in the pines, you might still hear it, the faint echo of a giant's laughter or the distant ring of a steel axe against a redwood tree. The throne may be empty, but the legend of Paul Bunyan will never die.